Hi everyone, it's Miss Greta, school-based occupational therapist. In today's video, we're going to talk about scissor skills for children preschool age or kindergarten age, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older, who are learning to hold, manipulate, and control scissors properly. All right, the first thing is holding the scissor. And most children in kindergarten will use a scissor, a child scissor like this. It has rounded edges, so it's a little safer. And we also have some that are a little bit bigger in the handle area, just to give them a little bit built up of a area for them to set their hands on. And if some children don't have the finger strength right away to hold or manipulate scissors, we have an adaptive scissor that we might use with them, which kind of doesn't need as much hand strength, and they kind of hold it with their whole hand if they don't have the manipulative skills just yet. And also, between this and a standard scissor, we have some scissors that are spring controlled and they open up on their own so that the child can strengthen their hands a little bit more, yet have the assistance of the spring. So if this is something your child might need in the classroom, that's absolutely something we would assess and provide to them. So the first thing I hear a lot of kindergarten teachers say is thumbs up, and which means when the child is holding the scissor to cut, their thumb is on top, because you see some children come in this way or maybe holding it a little bit awkwardly. So thumbs up is always a good thing to say. Or I've heard 2 fingers on the bottom, thumb on top, open up, and chop, chop, chop. So that's another way. And once I teach the children how to hold the scissor properly, I usually have a little song where I go like open and shut, just to get them to have that fluid motion of opening and closing the scissor. So once they have the proper way to hold a scissor, and we walk around, sometimes we need to reposition some children, or if you see that they have it upside down and their thumb is here, just kind of correct them, just like you would use a scissor at home. Thumb on top in the smaller hole, and then I always say the larger hole is enough room for 2 fingers. Okay, the first thing you're going to do, and where you're going to start when your child has learned how to hold the scissors properly, if they're just starting out, you're just going to do snips. You're just going to give them a piece of paper, and they're going to practice just making snips and opening and closing the scissor appropriately to just make little cuts in the paper. Some kids at first might push the scissor through the paper and kind of tear it or jumble it all up. So that's why we encourage them at first to manipulate the scissors just to open and close and make little snips. After that, you're going to move on to just cutting a straight line. You can use dotted lines, you can use a solid line, but the first way they're going to learn to cut before they get into cutting shapes out or anything smaller is just to cut a straight line. So on this sheet I have a green dot to start and a red dot to end. Now it's so important when they're cutting, I've talked about bilateral integration or using 2 hands together. They're going to cut with their dominant hand and hold the paper with the other hand. So you're going to say cut as close as you can on the line till you get to the end. And that's an easy motion for them at first. Just a basic straight line. They might deviate a little bit. They might have some choppy movements, but that's okay. It's just getting them to visually look at what they need to cut and control their motor movements with that position. After that, if they're doing well with straight lines, then, and this is so simple, any kind of scrap paper you have lying at home, just write little zigzags on it or curves like this. So straight line, if they've mastered that, then I would move to a curved line. So they're starting to get some turns of the scissors. They're starting to need, while they're cutting, to use the other hand and both hands together to control. See, I went off the line, but you get the idea. So now they're starting to use the two hands together. You don't need to watch me cut all these, but next, a zigzag line would be the next best way to go. So straight line, curved lines, zigzag lines. After that, if they're doing really well and they want to challenge themselves a little more, here's another design I often use with children. It's kind of like a maze, but what they need to do is start here, stay on the line as much as possible, all the way till they get to the center. I'm not going to do this one, but it's really cool because after it's done, it kind of makes like a slinky snake, and kids always like that. All right. If children then, when they move on to cutting out shapes, such as circles, or in the classroom, they'll be cutting out little boxes to tape to their worksheet. If they're having trouble with that and cutting smaller things out, what I have them do, if they needed to cut the triangle out and they don't have the control yet to cut something this small, I draw a purple line or a blue line or a contrasting color to what the shape is. And I say, okay, we're going to cut this triangle out. So what I want you to do, I'm going to help you. And the first thing we're going to do is just cut this purple line. So as close to the shape as possible, you want to draw the line. So then it's like that. So then I'll get the marker again and I'll go a little bit closer. So I just drew this blue line. And what they're going to do is then cut the blue line as close as possible. Okay, so they're almost cutting the triangle out, but they're not cutting into it. They're not getting discouraged because they are cutting it out. And then you can just finish up the shape and draw one more line here. And same thing with circles. This might be difficult for some children to cut out. And this might be extra difficult and more challenging because it's so small. So if they can do shapes like this, but they're struggling with this one, I would do the same thing. I would get a marker and I would say, okay, I'm going to help you cut out that smaller shape. And then you can see I drew an orange line like that. So I'll say we're going to get as close as possible to here. And they're going to cut. And then I'll keep doing that. I'll draw another line kind of around the circle, and I'll have them cut that orange line till we get closer and closer. Another thing we've talked about, and it's important to mention when cutting, is if the children are still developing their postural control and their base of support, you might see them cutting something out and their arms are way out here and they're kind of awkward. And what they're trying to do is gain the postural stability for cutting that out. But what you want to encourage is the movement to come more from their hands and their wrists as they're cutting. So what I sometimes do in that situation, I would take a folder or a piece of paper and I would have the child hold that under their arm while they're cutting. So that's reducing them kind of flailing around with their elbows, and it's putting the motion right in front of them at their hands. So they're forced to keep that down. Sometimes you might see them standing with their legs wide apart because they're trying to gain that postural control. But if you put the folder in there, it kind of forces them to keep the cutting motion right in front of them. Now, all the things I showed you, you can just, like I said, do on scrap paper or construction paper at home. Have them get old magazines or newspapers and cut out pictures or things like that. If you go online, if you want to buy a scissor skills book, they do have a whole bunch. This is one that I picked up online. You just Google scissor skills. But like I said, it's really not necessary to purchase anything like that because you can make them all kinds of shapes and circles at home. Or if you go online and Google scissor skills, there's all kinds of templates and examples that you can use. Another thing that's great for them is to take a picture out of a magazine or an old book. I'm not encouraging them to cut up their books, but just an old picture you might have from a magazine or something, and draw lines on it almost like a puzzle. And you can glue it to a piece of cardboard if you want to do that as well. And you would have them cut it out. So that's not only going to help them control their scissors, but then you have a nice little mini puzzle for them to do, and that will help with visual perception and putting things together, and that's another great skill. So these are just some examples of scissor skills just to help your child along. Some kids are going to be great scissor skills right off the bat, and other kids are going to have, you know, some needs in the area. So these are just some kind of little techniques that if you want to help your child at home to improve their scissor skills and gain their control, that would be great for them, and it would improve their confidence overall, and it will in turn help with their little fine motor skills as well. All right, thank you very much. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again.